Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 7 composers who perfectly balanced sanity with insanity. Now, some of you were querying because we did the insane composers and the healthy insane composers. And you said, well, what about so-and-so? Or you left out thus and thus and such and what and hoo-ha and all that stuff. Well, you guessed it correctly. A couple of you did. There is yet a third list. Composers who held sanity and insanity in perfect equipoise. Now, let's be clear about a couple of things. Aside from the fact that what I'm telling you is the objective truth, there is no moral value, comparatively speaking, in being sane, insane, or neither sane nor insane. There is only musical tendencies and the evident value arising from listening to what these composers produced. So you may have a slightly different list, although I can hardly imagine anyone disagreeing with me. I think these composers really showed that they were neither crazy nor sane. Totally, always. In other words, they knew when to be which, when to be each, whatever the work demanded. Of course, all composers do. All great composers know that, don't they? We're talking about general trends, not absolute, inarguable. Well, yes, it is absolute and inarguable, but they're general trends, okay? So let's just leave it at that and get to the list. Number 1, Sibelius. Sibelius is a really fascinating composer. He doesn't get nearly the credit he deserves outside of, I think, like Finland and the English-speaking world. I really pat the English-speaking world on its back, especially in England, for understanding what the guy was about, because he began life as a crazy, a Tchaikovsky list guy, and if that isn't crazy, then nothing is. And then he evolved into a sane or beautifully balanced composer, because he became somewhat neoclassical as he got older, but not Stravinsky and neoclassical, not at all. It was his own inward evolution that sought to balance the overt emotionalism and formal looseness of his earlier work with greater discipline and neatness and clarity and expressive point in his later music. And so he's got the best of both worlds. There's no question about that in my mind, and wrote a body of work which, for evidencing those qualities, that idea of clarity and beauty and involving both Finnish, whatever he took from Finishosity with nature and all of these other things, but always expressed in music of extraordinary clarity and cogency. That is the model. Yes, it's the model. So after Sibelius, we have Brahms. Of course, there's Brahms. Brahms also began life as a, believe it or not, we forget, because his reputation as a conservative classicist, was so firmly entrenched. But he started life as a wild-eyed romantic. He did. Those early piano sonatas, the first piano concerto, things like that, where there's all kinds of rage and panting and drooling all over the place. And then he wound up somehow learning how to use and revitalize classical formal structures and concepts with music of great emotional intensity and expressive richness and depth. And remember, Schoenberg himself wrote that famous essay, Brahms the Progressive. Of course, it wasn't about Brahms, it was about Schoenberg, because everything Schoenberg wrote was. But still, the idea was that Brahms was not as conservative as he thought. He had the balance. He found the way. The force was with him in combining that expressive urgency with great formal control and concision as he got older. So yeah, Brahms is one of them. After Brahms, Chopin. Nobody thinks about Chopin as anything, really, don't we? Chopin was just Chopin. He was Chopin-esque, largely because he wrote only for the piano. That was part of it, but also the fact that his music is so immediately attractive to everyone that no one bothers to think about whether it's crazy or not. But it really, the discipline that Chopin showed in writing almost entirely for his own instrument, and using dance forms and polonaises and mazurkas and waltzes and salon music, things that were supposedly trivial, and turning them into absolutely amazing masterpieces of feeling and form and poetic expression. Wow. Really is kind of amazing, isn't it, when you think about it? I think Chopin deserves vastly more credit than he normally gets for being a composer of extraordinary discipline and self-knowledge and range within his given element. Really, really exceptional. So after Chopin, who we got? We've got Verdi. Yeah, Verdi. Verdi, who began as a sort of bel cantist and wound up with Falstaff and Otello as the avatar of Italian musical purity and elegance and effectiveness. And I mean, everything he learned basically by himself. He was self-taught in many, many ways. Yeah, he went to like a conservatory, but his own style became so wonderfully expressive, but at the same time so Italianate, and that it's kind of a miracle. It really is. He was healthy in that respect. You see, he was healthy. I mean, his music was vigorous and full of energy and life, and yet he was able to write operas about crazy people and people killing each other. But he wound up writing one of the great comedies. And yes, he could do everything. He could do everything, and he did it all with a clear-eyed view of who he was and what he was and how he wanted to do it and what he needed to do it. And he did it the way he did it because he wanted to do it the way. Well, anyway, you know what I mean. You get the impression, right? He just was definitely beautifully balanced as a personality, as a character. I mean, he was a noble person, too. Really is an astonishing man. After Verdi, Schubert. Yes, Schubert. Schubert, who died so tragically young, but who was also, he began life as a fake classicist, a faux classicist in the style of Haydn and Mozart, and wound up a real classicist in the style of himself. Really exceptional. His journey was brief. He was so young when he died, but you could see where the trajectory was going. He was a romantic almost by the end of his life, but one with an extraordinary feeling, a personal feeling for form and musical syntax. And I mean, his late sonatas, his late quartets, the last couple of symphonies, the late chamber pieces, the quintet. Oh my God, the quintet. I mean, is there anything that has in such perfect balance this almost transcendental expressiveness, along with a rock solid formal grip on what he's doing? Really, really an amazing composer, and I think one who really does fall in between the classical and the romantic periods, just as he's between the sane and the insane. After Schubert, Mahler. This may surprise you. It may surprise you because Mahler has a reputation for being just hard-on-sleeve emotional hysteria and sort of formless dribble with, an eclectic potpourri of styles and idioms from everywhere, and the symphony must be the world, and it's just a kitchen sink grab bag of random elements all thrown together. I mean, some people really believe that because they haven't listened to the music well and they don't understand it at all. But Mahler was a formal genius. He reinvented the symphony in his own image, each work being an adumbration and evolution of what had come before. And I can't even begin to tell you just how formally fascinating the guy is, and how much inspiration he proved for so many other composers. Benjamin Britten would be nowhere without the Mahler of the Eighth Symphony and Das Lied von der Erde, and so many other composers too. I mean, the Song Symphony, the things that Mahler did in his brief life in this extraordinary small body of work. But every single one of these pieces has its own story to tell, and does it with unbelievable mastery. Even Tovey, Remember Tovey, who was, nobody if not critical of things that fell below the standards of the great classics. I mean, he insisted that Mahler had to be recognized as a classic. And he said that Mahler's music was so rich in everything, in orchestration, in form, and that you just have to sit back and throw up your hands and say, well, yeah, he could do it, and do what he did. However, the ultimate is the one we've saved for last, of course, and it's Beethoven. And I know some of you are going to say, oh, yes, well, you're just falling into that paradigm that sets Beethoven as the acme of all of Western music because he was Beethoven. It's the 19th century, composer hero worship thing, that paradigm. And I get it. I really do. And I'm very conscious of that. I really am. But when you really sort of look at what Beethoven achieved, Beethoven was also a composer. I mean, we're seeing a pattern here, aren't we? Beethoven began as a crazy romantic in the style of Haydn and Mozart. It was Mozart on steroids. And then a wild-eyed revolutionary who, as he got older, became more and more interested in music for itself. Not music as, a form of social protest or music as a weapon with which to flog his audience or his listeners, but rather music as a means of expression of the human condition to be explored by purely musical means. In Beethoven's case, it was an evolving conflict between the sonata, the dramatic style, and the Baroque rhetorical style, between counterpoint and tonal drama. I mean, that's how Beethoven began to see it, which was actually rather similar to what he learned from Haydn. But in a sense, his work synthesized the sane and the insane, the sanity of Haydn with the insanity of Mozart. He put the two of them together and added his own personality to the mix. And as a result, I mean, he was personally, as we know, somewhat crazy, somewhat loony, but I'm not really interested in personalities as much as I'm interested in musical expression, how that personality manifested itself in the music. And particularly in late Beethoven, you see this unbelievable balancing act, especially in like the late quartets and piano sonatas. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And so Beethoven is the acme of composers who perfectly balanced sanity and insanity. And with that, we come to the end of this little mini series of 3 videos: the sane, the insane, and the balanced. I hope you found it interesting and gave you some food for thought. And I've seen you suggesting your own additions and deletions and whatnot. It's been a very stimulating conversation. So thank you for participating in it with me. Keep on listening and take care.